Chapter 9, The Promised Land. The capture and removal of Marduk from Babylon had geopolitical repercussions, shifting for several centuries the center of gravity from Mesopotamia westward to the land along the Mediterranean Sea. In religious terms, it was the equal of the tectonic earthquake. In one blow, all the great expectations by Marduk for all gods to be gathered under his aegis, and all the messianic expectations by his followers were gone like a puff of smoke. But both geopolitically and religiously, the greatest impact can be summed up as the story of three mountains, the three space-related sites that put the Promised Land in the midst of it all: Mount Sinai, Mount Moriah, and Mount Lebanon. Of all the events that followed, the unprecedented occurrence in Babylon, the central and most lasting one, was the Israelite Exodus from Egypt, when, for the first time, sites that until then were the gods alone were entrusted to people. When the Hittites took to Marduk captive, withdrew from Babylon, they left behind political disarray and a religious enigma. How could that happen? What did it happen? Why did it happen? When bad things happened to people, they would say that the gods were angry. So what now that bad things happened to gods to Marduk? Was there a God supreme to the supreme God? If Babylon itself, the eventual release and return of Marduk, did not provide an answer, in fact, it increased the mystery for the Kassites, who welcomed the captured God back to Babylon, where non-Babylonian strangers. They called Babylonian Kardunesh and had names such as Barnaburash and Kardinash, but little else is known about them or their original language. To this day, it is not clear from where they came and why their kings were allowed to replace the Hammurabi dynasty circa 1660 BCE and to dominate Babylon from 1560 BCE until 1160 BCE. Modern scholars speak of the period that followed Marduk's humiliation as a dark age in Babylon's history, not only because the disarray it caused, but mainly because of the veracity of written Babylonian records from that time. The Kassites quickly integrated themselves into the Sumerian Akkadian culture, including language and cuneiform script, but were neither the meticulous record keepers the Sumerians had been, nor the likes of previous Babylonian writers of royal annals. Indeed, most of the few royal records of Kassite kings have been found not in Babylon but in Egypt, clay tablets in the El Amarna archive of royal correspondence. Remarkably, in those tablets, the Kassite kings called the Egyptian pharaohs "my brother." The expression, though figurative, was not unjust, for Egypt shared with Babylon the veneration of Ra Marduk, and like Babylonia, had also undergone a dark age, a period scholars call the Second Intermediate Period. It began with the demise of the Middle Kingdom circa 1780 BCE and lasted until about 1560 BCE. As in Babylonia, it featured a region of foreign kings known as kiosks. Here, too, is not certain who they are, from where they came, or how it was that their dynasties were able to rule Egypt for more than 2 centuries. That the dates of this second intermediate period, with its many obscure aspects, parallel the dates of Babylon's slide from the peak of Hammurabi's victories, 1760 BCE, to the capture and resumption of Marduk's worship in Babylon, circa 1560 BCE. It's probably neither accident nor coincidence. Those similar developments at parallel times in Marduk's principal lands happened because Marduk was hoisted by his own petard. The very justification for his claim to supremacy was now causing his undoing. The petard was Marduk's own initial contention that the time for his supremacy on earth had arrived, because in the heavens, the age of the ram, his age, had arrived. But as the zodiacal clock kept ticking, the age of the ram started to slowly slip away. The physical evidence from those perplexing times still exists and can be seen in Thebes, the ancient Egyptian capital of Upper Egypt. Apart from the Great Pyramids of Giza, ancient Egypt's most impressive and majestic monuments were the colossal temples of Karnak and Luxor in southern Upper Egypt. The Greeks called the place Thebai, from which its name in English, Thebes, derives. The ancient Egyptians called it the city of Amun, for it was to this unseen god that those temples were dedicated. The hieroglyphic writing and the pictorial depictions on their walls, obelisks, pylons, and columns glorify the gods and praise the pharaohs who built, enlarged, expanded, and kept changing the temples. It was there that the arrival of the age of the ram was announced by the rows of ram-headed sphinx, and it was there that the very layout of the temple reveals the secret quandary of Egypt's followers of Ra-Amun-Marduk. One time, visiting the sites with a group of fans, I stood in the midst of the temple waving my hands as a traffic policeman. Amazed onlookers wondered, who is this nut? But I was trying to point out to my group the fact that the thieves' temple, built by a succession of pharaohs, kept changing their orientation. It was Sir Norman Lockyer who, in the 1890s, first grasped the significance of this architectural aspect, giving rise to a discipline called archaeoastronomy. Temples that were oriented to the equinoxes, like Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem and the old St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican in Rome, faced permanently east, welcoming sunrise on equinox day year after year without reorientation. But temples orientated to the solstice, like Egypt's temple in Thebes or China's Temple of Heaven in Beijing, needed periodic reorientation because, due to the precession where the sun rises on solstice day, shifts ever so slightly over the centuries, as can be illustrated by Stonehenge, where Lockyer applied his findings. The very temple that Ra-Marduk's followers had erected to glorify him were showing that the heavens were uncertain about the durability of the god and his age. Marduk himself, so aware of the zodiacal clock, when he had claimed in his previous millennium that his time had arrived, tried to shift the religious focus by introducing the star religion of Marduk as Nibiru. But his capture and humiliation now raised questions regarding the unseen celestial god. The question, until when will the age of Marduk last, changed to the question if celestial Marduk is the unseen Nibiru. When will it reveal itself, reappear, return? As unfolding events showed, both the religious and the geopolitical focus shifted in the middle of the second millennia BCE to the stretch of the land that the Bible called Canaan. As the return of Nibiru started to emerge, as the religious focus, the space-related sites also emerged into sharper focus, and it was in the geographic Canaan where both the landing place and the erstwhile mission control center were located. Historians tell the ensuing events in terms of the rise and fall of nation-states and the clash of empires. It was circa 1460 BCE that the forgotten kingdoms of Elam and Anshan, later known as Persia, east and southeast of Babylonia, joined to form a new and powerful state, with Susa, the biblical Shushan, as the national capital of Ninurta, the national god, and Shar Ilani, lord of the gods. That newly assertive nation-state was to play a decisive role in ending Babylon's and Marduk's supremacy. It was probably no coincidence that about the same time a new powerful state arose in the Euphrates region where Murray had once dominated. There the biblical Horites, scholars call them Hurans, formed a powerful state named Mitanni, the weapon of Anu, which captured the lands that are now Syria and Lebanon and posed as a geopolitical and religious challenge to Egypt. That challenge was countered most ferociously by Egypt's pharaoh Thutmose III, whom historians describe as an Egyptian Napoleon. Intertwined with all that was the Israelite Exodus from Egypt, that period's seminal event, if for no other reason than due to its lasting effects to this day on mankind's religious, social, and moral codes, and the centrality of Jerusalem. Its timing was not accidental, for all those developments related to the issue of who shall control the space-related sites when Nibiru returns will occur. As was shown in previous chapters, Abraham did not just happen to become a Hebrew patriarch, but was a chosen participant in major international affairs, and the places where his tale took us, Ur, Haran, Egypt, Canaan, Jerusalem, the Sinai, Sodom, and Gomorrah, were principal sites of the universal story of gods and men in earlier times. The Israelite Exodus from Egypt, recalled these celebrated by the Jewish people during the Passover holiday, was likewise an integral aspect of the events that were then unfolding throughout the ancient lands. The Bible itself, far from treating the Exodus as just an Israelite story, clearly places it in the context of Egyptian history and the international events of the time. The Hebrew Bible opens the story of the Israelite Exodus from Egypt in its second book, Exodus, by reminding the reader that the Israelite presence in Egypt began when Jacob, who was renamed Israel by an angel, and his other 11 sons joined Jacob's son Joseph in Egypt. In 1833 BCE, the full story of how Joseph separated from his family, rose from being a slave to the rank of viceroy, and how he saved Egypt from a devastating famine is told by the Bible in the last chapters of Genesis. And my take on how Joseph saved Egypt and what evidence of that exists to this day is told in the Earth Chronicle expeditions. Having reminded the reader of how when the Israelite presence in Egypt began, the Bible makes it clear that all that was gone and forgotten by the time of the Exodus, Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation had passed away. Not only they, but even the dynasty of the Egyptian kings who were connected to those times were also long gone. A new dynasty came into power, and there arose a new king over Egypt who knew not Joseph. Accurately, the Bible describes the change of government in Egypt. The dynasties of the Middle Kingdom, based in Memphis, were gone, and after the disarray of the second intermediate period of the princes of Thebes, launched the dynasties of the New Kingdom. Indeed, there arose entirely new kings over Egypt, new dynasties in a new capital, and they knew not Joseph. Forgetting the Israelite contribution to Egypt's survival, a new pharaoh now saw danger in their presence. He ordered a series of oppressive steps against them, including the killing of all male babies. These were his reasons, and he said unto his people, Behold, a nation, children of Israel, is greater and mightier than us. Let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and when war shall be called, they will join our enemies and fight against us and leave the land. Exodus 1:9-10. Biblical scholars have assumed all along that the feared nation of the children of Israel were the Israelites sojourning in Egypt, but this is in accord with neither the numbers given nor with the literal wandering in the Bible. Exodus begins with a list of names of Jacob and his children who had come with their children to join Joseph in Egypt, and states that all of those who descended from the loins of Jacob, excluding Joseph, who was already in Egypt, numbered 70. That, together with Jacob and Joseph, the number totaled 72, is an intriguing detail to ponder. The sojourn lasted 4 centuries, and according to the Bible, the number of all the Israelites leaving Egypt was 600,000. No pharaoh would consider such a group greater and mightier than us, for the identity of that pharaoh and of the pharaoh's daughter, who raised Moses as her son, see Divine Encounters. The natives' wording records with the pharaoh's fear that at time of war the Israelites will join our enemies and fight against us and leave the land. It is a fear not of a fifth column inside Egypt, but of Egypt's indigent children of Israel leaving to reinforce an enemy nation to whom they are related, all of them being, in Egyptian eyes, children of Israel. But what other nation of children of Israel, and what war was the Egyptian king talking about? Thanks to archaeological discoveries of royal records from both sides of the ancient conflicts and the synchronization of their contents, we now know that the New Kingdom pharaohs were engaged in prolonged warfare against Mitanni, starting circa 1560 BCE with the pharaohs Ahmosis, continued by the pharaohs Amenophis, Thothmosis, and the first and second, and intensifying under Thothmosis III through 1460 BCE. Egyptian enemies thrust into Canaan and advanced northward against Mitanni. The Egyptian chronicles of those battles frequently mentioned Naran as the ultimate target. The Kabur River area, which the Bible called Aram Naharim, the western lands of the two rivers. Its principal urban center was Haran. It was there, Bible students will recall, that Abraham's brother Nahor stayed on when Abraham proceeded to Canaan. It was from there that Rebekah, the bride of Abraham's son Isaac, came. She was in fact the granddaughter of Nahor, and it was to Haran that Isaac's son Jacob, renamed Israel, went to find the bride, ending up marrying his cousins, the two daughters Leah and Rachel of Laban, the brother of his mother. These direct family ties between the children of Israel, i.e., of Jacob, who were in Egypt, and those who stayed on the Naharim, are highlighted in the very first verses in Exodus. The list of the sons of Jacob who had come to Egypt with him includes the youngest, Benjamin, the only full brother of Joseph, because both were Jacob's son by Rachel. The others were sons of Jacob by his wife Leah and two concubines. We now know from Mitannian tablet that the most important tribe in the Kabur River area were called Benyamins. The name of Joseph's full brother was thus a Mitannian tribal name. No wonder, then, that the Egyptians considered the children of Israel in Egypt and the children of Israel in Mitanni as one combined nation, greater and mightier than us. That was the war the Egyptians were preoccupied with, and that was the reason for the Egyptian military concern, not the small number of Israelites in Egypt if they stayed, but a threat if they left the land and occupied territory to the north of Egypt. Indeed, preventing the Israelites from leaving appears to have been the central theme of the developing drama of the Exodus. There were the repeated appeals by Moses to the reigning Pharaoh to let my people go, and the Pharaoh's repeated refusal to grant that request in spite of 10 consecutive divine punishments. Why? For a plausible answer, we need to insert a space connection into the unfolding drama. In their northward thrust, the Egyptians marched through the Sinai Peninsula via the Way of the Sea, a route later called by the Romans via Maris. That afforded passage through the God's fourth region along the Mediterranean coast without actually entering the peninsula proper. Then, advancing north through Canaan, the Egyptians repeatedly reached the Cedar Mountains of Lebanon and fought battles at Kadesh, the sacred place. Those were battles, we suggest, for control of the two sacred space-related sites, the erstwhile Mission Control Center in Jerusalem and Canaan, and the landing place in Lebanon. The pharaoh Thutmose III, for example, in his war annals referred to Jerusalem, Ayurasa, which he garrisoned, as the place reaching to the outer ends of the earth, a navel of the earth. Describing his campaigns further north, he recorded battles at Kadesh and Naharan, and spoke of taking the Cedar Mountains, the mountains of God's land, that support the pillars to heaven. The terminology unmistakably identifies by their space-related attributes the two sites he was claiming to have captured for the great God, my father Ra-Amen. And the purpose of the Exodus? In the words of the biblical God himself, to keep his sworn promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to grant their descendants as an everlasting heritage from the Book of Egypt to the river Euphrates and the great river, the whole of the land Canaan, the western mount, the land of Canaan and Lebanon, from the desert to Lebanon, from the river Euphrates unto the western sea, and even the fortified places reaching heavenwards, wherein descendants of the Anakim, the Anunnaki, still reside. The promise to Abraham was renewed at the Israelites' first stop at Har Ha-Elohim, the mount of the Elohim gods, and the mission was to take hold, possess the two other space-related sites, which the Bible repeatedly connected, as in Psalms 48:3, calling Mount Zion in Jerusalem Har Kodishi, my sacred mount, and the other on the crest of Lebanon, Har Zarfan, the secret north mount. The Promised Land clearly embraced both space-related sites. Its division among the 12 tribes granted the area of Jerusalem to the tribes of Benjamin and Judea, and the territory that is now Lebanon to the tribe of Asher. In his parting words to the tribes before he died, Moses reminded the tribes of Asher that the northern space-related site was in their land. Like no other tribe, he said, they will see the rider of the clouds soaring heavenwards. Apart from the territorial assignments, the words of Moses imply that the site would be functional and used for soaring heavenward in the future. Clearly, and most emphatically, the children of Israel were to be the custodians of the two remaining space-related sites of the Anunnaki. That covenant with the people chosen for the task was renewed at the greatest theophany on record at Mount Sinai. It was certainly not by chance that the theophany occurred here. From the very beginning of the Exodus tale, when God called out to Moses and gave him the Exodus assignment, that place in the Sinai Peninsula occupied center stage. We read in Exodus 3:1 that it happened at the Mount of the Elohim, the mount associated with the Anunnaki. The route of the Exodus was divinely determined, the Israelites' multitude having been shown the way by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The children of Israel journeyed in the wilderness of Sinai according to the instructions of Yahweh. The Bible clearly states, in the third month of the journey, they reached and encamped opposite the mount, and on the third day thereafter, Yahweh and his kabod came down upon Mount Sinai in full view of all the people. It was the same mount that Gilgamesh, arriving at the place where the rocket ships ascended and descended, had called Mount Mashu. It was the same mount with the double doors to heaven, to which Egyptian pharaohs went in their afterlife, journeying to join the gods on the planet of millions of years. It was the mount astride the erstwhile spaceport, and it was there that the covenant was renewed with the people chosen to be the guardians of the two remaining space-related sites. As the Israelites were preparing after the death of Moses to cross the Jordan River, the boundaries of the Promised Land were restated to the new leader, Joshua, embracing the locations of the space-related sites, the boundaries emphatically, including Lebanon. Speaking to Joshua, the biblical God said, "Now arise and cross this Jordan, thou and all this people of the children of Israel, unto the land which I do give to them. Every place where the soles of your feet shall tread upon, have I given to you, just as I have spoken to Moses. From the desert to the Lebanon, and from the great river, the river Euphrates, in the country of the Hittites, unto the great sea where the sun sets, that shall be your boundary." Joshua 1:2 verses 4. With so much of the current political, military, and religious turmoil taking place in the lands of the Bible, and with the Bible itself serving as a key to the past and to the future, one must point out a caveat inserted by the biblical God in regard to the Promised Land. The boundaries running from the wilderness in the south to the Lebanon Range in the north, and from the Euphrates in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, were reconfirmed to Joshua. These, God said, were promised boundaries, but to become an actual land grant, it had to be obtained by possession. Akin to the planting of the flag by the explorers in the recent past, the Israelites could possess and keep land where they actually set foot, tread with the soles of their feet. Therefore, God commanded the Israelites not to tarry and delay, but to cross the Jordan and fearlessly and systematically settle the promised land. But when the 12 tribes, under the leadership of Joshua, were done with the conquest and settlement of Canaan, only part of the areas east of the Jordan were occupied, nor were all the lands west of the Jordan captured and settled. As far as the two space-related sites were concerned, their stories are totally different. Jerusalem, which was specifically listed, was firmly in the hands of the tribe of Benjamin. But whether the northward advance attained the landing place in Lebanon is in doubt. Subsequent biblical references to the site called it the crest of Xiphon, the secret north place. What the area's dwellers, the Canaanite Phoenicians, also called it. Canaanite epics deemed it to be a sacred place of the god Adad, Enlil's youngest son. The crossing of the Jordan River, an accomplishment attained with the help of several miracles, took place opposite Jericho, and the fortified city of Jericho, west of Jordan, was the Israelites' first target. The story of the tumbling of its own walls and its capture included a biblical reference to Sumar. In spite of the commandment to take no booty, one of the Israelites could not resist the temptation to keep a valued garment of Shinar. The capital of Jericho and the town of Ai south of it opened the way to the Israelites. Most important and immediate targets, Jerusalem, where the mission control platform had been. The missions of Abraham and his descendants and God's covenants with them never lost sight of that site's centrality. As God told Moses, it is in Jerusalem that his earthly abode was to be. Now the promised prophecy could be fulfilled. The capture of the cities on the way to Jerusalem, along with the hill towns surrounding it, turned out to be a formidable challenge, primarily because some of them, and especially Hebron, were inhabited by children of Anakim, descendants of the Anunnaki. Jerusalem, it would be recalled, ceased to function as a mission control center when the spaceport in the Sinai was wiped out more than 6 centuries earlier. But according to the Bible, the descendants of the Anunnaki who had been stationed there were still residing in that part of Canaan. And it was Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, who formed an alliance with 4 other city kings to block the Israelite advance. The battle that ensued at Gib, on in the valley of Elon, just north of Jerusalem, took place on a unique day, the day the earth stood still. For the better part of that day, the sun stopped and the moon stood still, enabling the Israelites to win that crucial battle. A parallel but reverse occurrence when nighttime lasted an extra 20 hours took place on the other side of the world in the Americas. We discussed the matter of the lost realms and the biblical view. Then God himself assured that Jerusalem would come into Israelites' hands. No sooner was kingship established under David than he was commanded by God to clear the platform atop Mount Moriah and sanctify it for Yahweh's temple. And ever since Solomon built that temple there, Jerusalem, Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, have remained uniquely sacred. There is indeed no other explanation why Jerusalem, a city not at major crossroads, far from waterways, with no natural resources, has been coveted and sacred since antiquity, deemed to be a singular city, a navel of the earth. The comprehensive list of captured cities given in Joshua chapter 12 names Jerusalem as the 3rd city, following Jericho and Ai. As firmly in Israelite hands, the story was different, however, in regard to the northern space-related sites. The Cedar Mountains of Lebanon run in 2 ranges, the Lebanon on the west and the Anti-Lebanon on the east, separated by the Becca, the cleft, a canyon-like valley that has been known since Canaanite times as the Lord's Cleft, or Baalbekah, hence Baalbek, the current name of the site of the landing place, on the edge of the eastern range facing the valley. The kings of the Mount of the North are listed in the Book of Joshua as having been defeated. A place called Baal Gad in the Valley of Lebanon is listed as captured, but whether Baal Gad in the Valley of Lebanon is just another name for Baalbekah is uncertain. We were told that the tribes of Naphtali did not disinherit the dwellers of Beth Shemesh, adobe of Shemesh, the sun god, and that could be a reference to the site for the later Greeks called the place of Heliopolis, city of the sun. Though later the territories under King David and Solomon extended to include Beth Shemesh, it was only temporarily so. The primary failure to establish Israelite hegemony over the northern space-related site made it available to others. A century and a half after the Exodus, the Egyptians attempted to take possession of that available landing place, but were met by an opposing Hittite army. The epic battle is described in words and illustrations on the walls of Karnak's temples. Known as the Battle of Kadesh, it ended with the Egyptian defeat, but the war and the battle exhausted both sides so much that the site, the landing place, was left in the hands of the local Phoenician kings of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, the biblical Gebal. The prophets Ezekiel and Amos, who called it the place of the gods, as well as the Eden Adobe, recognized it as belonging to the Phoenicians. The Phoenician kings of the first millennia BCE were well aware of the site's significance and purpose, witnessed its depiction on a Phoenician coin from Byblos. The prophet Ezekiel admonished the king of Tyre for haughty believing that, having been to the sacred site of the Elohim, he had become himself a god. Thou hast been to the sacred mount. As a god, rest thou moving with the fiery stones. And you become haughty, saying, a god am I, at the place of the Elohim I was. But you are just man, not God. It was at that time that the prophet Ezekiel, in exile in the old country near Haran on the Kebir River, saw divine visions and a celestial chariot of a flying saucer. But that tale must be postponed to a later chapter. Here it is important to note that the two space-related sites, only Jerusalem, was retained by the followers of Yahweh. The first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, known as the Torah, the teachings, cover the story from creation, Adam and Noah, to the patriarchs Joseph and Genesis. The other 4 books, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, tell the story of the Exodus on the one hand, and on the other hand, enumerate the rules and regulations of the new religion of Yahweh. That a new religion encompassing a new and priestly way of life was promulgated is explicitly made clear. You shall neither do what is done in the land of Egypt where you had dwelt, nor as is wont in the land of Canaan, whence I am bringing you. You shall neither behave like them nor follow their statutes. Having established the basics of the faith, you shall have no other God before me, and its moral and ethical code in just 10 commandments. There followed page after page of detailed dietary requirements, rules for priestly rites and vestments, medical teaching, agricultural instructions, family and sexual conduct regulations, property and criminal laws, and so on. They reveal extraordinary knowledge in virtually every scientific discipline, expertise in metals and textiles, acquaintance with legal systems and societal issues, familiarity with the lands, history, customs, and gods of other nations, and certain numerological preferences. The themes of 12, as in the 12 tribes of Israel or in the 12-month year, is obvious. Obvious, too, is the predilection for 7, most prominently in the realm of festivals and rituals, and in establishing a week of 7 days and consecrating the 7th day as the Sabbath. 40 is a special number, as in the 40 days and 40 nights that Moses spent upon Mount Sinai, or the 40 years decreed for the Israelite wandering in Sinai's wilderness. These are numbers familiar to us from the Sumerian tales, the 12 of the solar system, and the 12th month calendar of Nippur. The 7 as the planetary number of the Earth when the Anunnaki counted from the outside in, and of Enlil as Earth's commander, the 40 as Ea Enki's numerical rank. The number 50 is also present. 50, as the reader knows, was the number with sensitive aspects. It was the original rank number of Enlil and the stand-in rank of his heir apparent Ninruta, and more significantly, in the days of Exodus, it connoted symbolism to Marduk and his 50 names. Extra attention is therefore called when we find that 50 was granted extraordinarily importance. It was used to create a new unit of time, the 50-year Jubilee. While the calendar of Nippur was clearly adopted as the calendar by which the festivals and other Israelite religious rites were to be observed, special regulations were dictated for the 50th year. It was given a special name, that of a Jubilee year. A hallowed Jubilee year it shall be unto you. Leviticus chapter 25. In such a year, unprecedented freedoms were to take place. The count was to be done by counting the New Year's Day of Atonements for 7 years sevenfold, 49 times. Then on the Day of Atonement, on the year thereafter, the 50th year, the trumpet call of a ram's horn was to be sounded throughout the land, and freedom was to be proclaimed for the land and all who dwell in it. People should return to their families. Property should return to its original owners. All land and house sales shall be redeemable and undone. Slaves who had to be treated at all times as hired help shall be set free, and liberty shall be given the land itself by leaving it fallow that year. As much as the concept of the year of freedom is novel and unique, the choice of 50 as a calendrical unit seems odd. We have adopted 100, a century, as a convenient unit of time. Then the name given to such a once in 50 year is even more intriguing. The word that is translated Jubilee is Yuval. In the Hebrew Bible, it means a ram. So one can say that what was decreed was a year of the ram, to repeat itself every 50 years and to be announced by sounding the ram's horn. Both the choice of 50 for the new time unit and its name raise the unavoidable question, was there a hidden aspect here related to Marduk and his age of the ram? Were the Israelites told to keep counting 50 years until some significant divine event relating either to the age of the ram or to the holder of the rank of 50, when everything shall turn back to a new beginning? While no obvious answer is offered in those biblical chapters, one cannot avoid searching for clues by pursuing a significant and very similar year unit on the other side of the world, not 50, but 52. It was the secret number of the Mesoamerican god Quitzel Cult, who, according to Aztec and Mayan legends, gave them civilization, including their three calendars. In the Lost Realms, we have identified Quetzal Cult as the Egyptian god Thoth, whose secret number was 52, a calendrical-based number, for it represented the 52 weeks of 7 days in a solar year. The oldest of the three Mesoamerican calendars is known as the Long Count. It counted the number of days from a day 1 that scholars have identified as August 13th, 3113 BCE. Alongside this continuous built lunar calendar, there were two cylindrical calendars. One, the Hab, was a solar year calendar of 365 days divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus an additional 5 special days at the end of the year. The other was a Tzolk'in, a sacred calendar of only 260 days, comprised of a 20-day unit rotated 13 times. The two cylindrical calendars were then meshed together as two geared wheels to create the sacred round of 52 years, when these two counts returned to their common starting point and started the counts all over again. This bundle of 52 years was the most important unit of time because it was linked to the promise of Quetzalcoatl, who at some point left Mesoamerica to return to his sacred year. The Mesoamerican people therefore used to gather on mountains every 52 years to expect the promised return of Quetzalcoatl. In one such sacred year, 1519 AD, a white-faced, bearded Spaniard, Hernando Cortez, landed on Mexico's Yucatan coast and was welcomed by the Aztec king Montezuma as the returning god, a costly mistake as we now know. In Mesoamerica, the bundle year served for a countdown to the promised year of return, and the question is, was the Jubilee year intended to serve a similar purpose? Searching for an answer, we find that when the linear 50-year time unit is meshed with the zodiacal silical unit of 72, the time that a shift of 1 degree requires, we arrive at 3600, which was the mathematical orbital period of Nibiru. By linking a Jubilee calendar and the zodiacal calendar to Nibiru's orbit was the biblical God saying, "When you enter the promised land, start the countdown to the return." Some 2,000 years ago, during the time a great messianic fervor, it was recognized that the Jubilee was a divinity-inspired time unit for predicting the future, for calculating when the meshed geared wheel of time will announce the return. That recognition underlies one of the most important post-biblical books known, the Book of Jubilees. Though available now only from its Greek and later translations, it was originally written in Hebrew, as fragments found among the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm. Based on earlier extra-biblical treaties, the sacred traditions, it rewrote the book of Genesis as part of Exodus according to a calendar based on the Jubilee time unit. It was a product, all scholars agree, of messianic expectations at the time when Rome occupied Jerusalem, and its purpose was to provide a means by which to predict when the Messiah shall come, when the end of days shall occur. It is the very task we have undertaken.